That 8,000 megawatts about killed the people that were doing it. I mean, that was a frenetic pace, okay? Keep that in mind, though, because we'll talk about that later. Even so, wind now is just emerging as a player in the supply picture. If you look at national electricity consumption and the supply, wind is like in the 1%, right? But if you go to certain parts of the country, if you go over to Colorado, okay, it's more like 10, 12, 14%, headed to 20% of their supply. In Minnesota, they have a renewable portfolio standard, and the utilities will supply 25% of their end-use electric energy from renewables. Well, that'll be mostly wind. Xcel Energy, Northern States Power, Minnesota, said, no, we can do better than that. They're going to do 30. Okay? So even though it's 1% on a national scale, you don't have to look very far to see where it's much more significant than that. At the same time, if we look forward over a reasonable planning horizon, and 2030 has been selected for a number of reasons, it's projected that the demand for electric energy is going to grow 39%. Okay, now that was pre-financial crisis and all that kind of stuff, and you know, maybe we won't see that, but that was really based on kind of 2007, 2008 assumptions. That's if we didn't do anything else. Now, there's a lot of things that are going on the end-use side, and if energy becomes more expensive, we may get smarter about how we use energy, so we won't see that 39%. But it is so vital to our economy that we're not going to use less energy in 2030 than we're using it now. Okay? And then when we take into account just the uncertainty associated with that horizon, as a utility, for example, you know, try to project the cost of natural gas out to, you know, even 10 years is a complete crapshoot. So, you know, going out to 2030 is huge. The climate legislation is critical. We're going to be burning coal for a long time. It's a question of whether we build new coal and a question of what it costs us to burn the coal we're burning, right? And so cap and trade or a price on carbon, that'll change the landscape with regard to the other supply options. And then finally, the nature of the electric load. I hinted at that before about energy efficiency, okay? One thing I want to say, keep in mind that energy efficiency and conservation are two different things. Conservation means I'm going without because I'm trying to save. Energy efficiency means I'm being smart about it. Okay, I can spend some money and buy an appliance that gets me the same product. My beer is the same temperature as it was before, but I'm using less energy to do it. Okay, and those notions, as the cost of energy continues to rise, there will be a point where it catches on. It caught on with me because I get my power from TVA. My house is 20 years old and my upstairs air conditioner went belly up last fall, but after the heat had broken. And I went through the numbers over the wintertime, and it made sense at the fuel clause adjustments that are being passed through for the natural gas they burn on the margin and just the base price of electricity for me to invest in high efficiency heating and cooling for my whole house. Okay? So as those numbers grow, more people will do that, and it'll change the electric load. You've heard of the talk about plug-in hybrids, displacing some of the transportation fuels with electricity. That'll obviously change what the load looks like, especially at night for utilities. And then the whole smart grid concept. My partner spends his life in smart grid, and I think he's an evangelist in smart grid. And it includes everything, but there's a lot of good ideas there, and the end result would be a change in the end-use patterns. So let's look at how we got to where we're at with wind. It's a little bit of an interesting story because prior to 1980, we thought that we could beat Mother Nature. We built some very, very large turbines, and basically the forces of nature were more than we had anticipated at the time, and they didn't work. So what the industry did was retrench and go back to building very small turbines, the 50 kilowatt variety, building large numbers of them and learning about operation and maintenance, manufacturing techniques, you know, those sorts of things. And so from the 1980 to 1990, if you still drive through Southern California, the Palm Springs area, Tehachapi, you see those small turbines. They're actually an eyesore, right? But they still, in movies, those are the ones you see. That's not what we're doing now. That's 1980s vintage technology. In 1990, the things that were learned from the experience in the 80s allowed us to scale up as far as the turbine size. We knew a lot more about the aerodynamics and structural loads and all those sorts of things, and that allowed us to grow. Such that, from 2000 on, we're really in the megawatt scale turbines, megawatt and above. And right now, the average would be like a couple of megawatts, depending on the manufacturer, of course. There are forecasts to scale that up, but there are some pretty significant thresholds in there. Keep in mind that these turbines are all low voltage, if you will, in that the terminal voltage on these turbines is 500, 690, something like that. To go to the 5 megawatts, now we have to go to medium voltage. So that has huge implications for the operations and maintenance staff and all those sorts of things. So there's some barriers to going up. So when we look at wind applications, there's 3 general areas. We have the small wind, that would be the 10 kilowatt or so, maybe 20, 40 kilowatt turbine on farms, remote applications for battery charging. We scale that up and we go into the couple hundred kilowatt range, and we see that for village power applications, hybrid systems, distributed applications. If you look at Alaska, the village systems where they're using wind, it's turbines in that size range. And then finally we have what has been called utility scale turbines, which is megawatt and above now. But not just megawatt and above, it's megawatt and above a number of those turbines, and then you build the medium voltage infrastructure to collect the energy from all those turbines and deliver it to a substation that's connected to the transmission system. We'll see all these applications going forward, but just keep in mind that all the megawatts are going to be here. Okay. One thing worth noting, I think there's some interest in the community-based energy development in Nebraska. That's big in Minnesota. And that's a little bit of a hybrid, because in some cases, or in most cases, they're using the utility scale turbines, GE Vestas or whatever, but just building smaller plants that might not be connected to a transmission voltage, but rather to a lower voltage, like 35 kV or 69 kV that you see in these parts of in this part of the world. But still, all the megawatts are going to be in the bulk plants. So, one of the things that's driven wind in the U.S. is simply that we have a great resource. As is the case with other things, we're sort of behind the Europeans in terms of not necessarily technology, but just where the industry is at, especially in Germany and Denmark. And we need to keep in mind that they did that in spite of not having great wind, okay, relative to ours. And if you look at the cost of energy from wind, most of it boils down to the resource. Okay, average annual wind speed and some other factors. And then what you see on this slide is that the Great Plains, Texas to Dakotas, to the Canadian border, have just a tremendous resource. Obviously, you see some great resources in the mountain areas, in Colorado and Wyoming and stuff, but if you think about building large plants, that's somewhat problematic. Okay? The plains are great for laying these plants out, for situating turbines such that they don't see winds with very high turbulence that shake them apart, all those sorts of things. So the Midwest is the breadbasket for wind energy. We do, if you look, let's see, is my laser working here? Great Lakes, but just offshore in the mid-Atlantic. The offshore resource is interesting. Keep in mind that going offshore is not like building wind plants onshore. We're talking about it because those winds off the mid-Atlantic and the northeastern states tend to blow in the afternoon in the summer when loads are high, and there's potentially some other value there. But building turbines offshore, you pay a very significant premium to get that done, and we have to understand that we have very little experience in doing that. So that's farther down the road. We know how to build plants onshore, make them work, maintain them, get them connected to the grid. as part of the industry maturing, you're seeing a lot of the